Yes. You have less people this service, but a little more energetic than last service, so that's good. I like that. My name is Christian. I'm one of the pastors here. So excited that you are with us. I gotta say, it is so cool for me this week. I've been the youth pastor for almost 8 years, and to see these guys up here leading us in worship is just so awesome to me. So cool to see God working in and through the next generation. There's several others that are on our worship team that aren't up here today, but it's just amazing that God is faithful and he works throughout every generation. And so, but today we have been in a series called Wisdom Under Fire, going through the story and life of Daniel. This is week 2. This week we're talking about not letting the world corrupt us and being determined to live a life for the Lord. And so we're going to take a break for that for a minute because I have a quote for us that I want to start with before we dig into today. Just looking back at 2020 and 2021, I don't know if you've seen any of the videos. It's like 2021 is going to be so much better. And it's like, man, we've already had trees down, power down, like just crazy stuff already. Not that God didn't work last year and that he's going to work this year like he did last year and people came to him. But I think everyone across the board, the more and more I talk with people, is that it has been a season of trial, a year of hardship across the board. And so with that, I love this quote, one of my favorite authors. It will not be on the screen, but it's by K.P. Yohannan. Listen to this. It says, "Our faith in God and in his goodness is the safety rope that pulls us out of whatever pit in which we find ourselves. If we believe God and believe he is good, no matter where we are, that safety rope will get us out, even when contrary to the feelings of the moment, simply affirming with conviction, I believe you, God. I believe that you are good, will get us on the road again." I don't know what kind of pit you've been in or what's gone on in your story or even your week this week. I know that I still don't have power, and it's been that way for the last 5 days, and all kinds of different things that you guys have gone through. But I love what he's saying here. He's saying that whatever pit or whatever fire we find ourselves in, as we're talking about wisdom under fire, if we affirm regardless of our feelings, regardless of our thoughts, that God is good and we hold on to that is a safety rope for us. And so my hope today as we journey through this and look in the life of Daniel and his crazy culture and our crazy culture, that you would see as we journey through that God is in control, that even when it seems out of control, he is in control, and that he is good. You guys ready? Yes, okay. So what we're gonna do is go through the stories, several stories, and over the weeks, we'll go through several more. But where we were last week is that God handed the Israelites into the hands of the Babylonians because the Israelites were entrenched in wickedness, like such wickedness that they would do things like sacrifice their babies to false gods. Like it was that bad. And they kept trying to God kept giving them warnings and trying to call them out, and they wouldn't. And so God gave them over in hopes that they would come to themselves and realize we need to get back to God because these things are not good. There are all kinds of those pieces. And so the Babylonians would come in, and Nebuchadnezzar was one of the most wicked kings in history. And he would go in and he would select people from the people he conquered, the people who were the most able and wise, and he would call them wise men. And he would take them into their kingship and he would castrate them. He would force them to learn witchcraft, their culture, and entrench them and indoctrinate them. Like you think of what we're going through in our culture, think about that like for a minute. Like how insane is that? And so where our story picks off and what we talked about last week is even though it seems out of control, God is in control and that he can work through it all. And so we're going to pick off in Daniel 1, right where we left off from last week. If you want, you can follow along with us, Daniel 1, verse 8. Because right after this, not only did they have what happened to them happen, then they're also now faced with these foods that they're trying to make them eat. And these guys were trying to get them to go against a direct command from the Lord. And so let's read this story. It says, "But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. Now God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel. But he responded, 'I am afraid of my lord the king, who has ordered that you eat this food and wine. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youths your age, I am afraid the king will have me beheaded.'" They're like, "That's fair, that's a good excuse." Daniel spoke with the attendant who had been appointed by the chief of staff to look after Daniel, Hannah, Mishael, and Azazar. "Please test us for 10 days on our diet and vegetables and water," Daniel said. "At the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food." So he allowed them to do this, and they actually looked 10 times better than the other ones. And so they were able to go about what they had wanted. But I want you to notice some things, and I want you to notice about our culture and his culture. Notice that all the things that had already happened, he didn't go, "You know what, I am done. You did what you did to me. You're making me learn your witchcraft and all this stuff, and I am sick of it. You're trying to indoctrinate me." And he's like, "Nope, I'm not doing it anymore." He didn't do that. And notice also in the story, it says he was actually a youth. Think about that. He was younger, a youth is what it says. In our culture right now, people on different sides are going, "Forget you, we're gonna fight now, we're gonna rally people, and we're gonna do this thing." We don't see that in Daniel. As we look at him use wisdom as he respects and asks questions. And he's respectfully, even after all that has been done to him, I think that is insane. I think that is insane. And as we look into our hearts and in our minds, what kind of attitude towards people on different stances or different spots than us do we have in our hearts? Are we filled with anger and rage and I'm sick of it and I'm done with it? Or are we, like Daniel, using wisdom, actually showing that he cares for them after what has been done to him and going about it in wisdom? Because in my mind, I would be like freaking out. We're held in captivity. All this stuff is going down. But that's not what we see in Daniel. In this season, what has it been like for you? Have you been faced with things that are just making you angry, things that affect you that weren't even your decision, things that you're outraged by, things that get you freaked out and amped up? And how are we responding? And I'll just be honest, for me, like even in the last 3 weeks, if you're to look back to a whole year, not just the week that we're in of a new year or two, the last 3 weeks for me and my family has actually been the hardest. And so I'm right there with you if you've had some different things go on in your life this year. But I want to have wisdom. I want to follow the Lord and even care about these other people and these different things like he did. Let's go down to the next one. I'm going to story this one, but our hope is that you would be journeying through the book of Daniel throughout this whole series. So this next story is in Daniel 2. I'm going to story it. You can go back and read it later. And if I miss some spots, you can come up and hit me on the shoulder next week, okay? Daniel 2. What happens next, immediately after this, and you'll relate to 2020, it's like boom, 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 thing, over and over again. But Nebuchadnezzar, this wicked king, has a dream. And so he calls together some of the wise men. It doesn't sound like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in this group because there was a lot of wise men. But he gathers some of them and says, "I have a dream, and I want you to tell me what my dream is and what it means." And they're like, "Well, first tell us your dream, and then we'll tell you what it means." Nebuchadnezzar was very smart and powerful, but he was wicked, and he saw what they were trying to do. He said, "No, you need to first tell me the dream so that I know you can interpret it." Right? And they're like, "No one can do that." So what does he do? He says, "Fine, I'm going to kill every wise man then." So he sends out troops to go kill everyone, and that includes Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They weren't even there to give the dream, even though Daniel, as it says, had that gift from the Lord. And so they go and they tell Daniel what's going on. And he's like, why is this so harsh? What's going on? And he asks the officer if he could please go before the king. And he says, I'll see what we can do. And I love what Daniel does here. And it has me thinking about what's been happening in my life during this season. It says that he immediately went to the Lord in prayer. Immediately went to the Lord. You know, in this season, it's like sometimes I immediately go to the news and to articles and to Facebook, and I need to know everything that's going on, because if I know everything, then I'll make the best decision. Instead of going directly to the Lord, to his word, to what he says, to trusting in him, Daniel's first line of defense was God. What has our first line of defense in this season been? Has it been to run to the Lord? Has it been to panic? Has it been to try to figure out all the facts on our own so I can make the best decision within myself? That's gotten me thinking, like looking back over this chunk of time, I'm not gonna lie, there's been times where I'm like, man, we need to go stock up on food. Like they're all gonna take the food and all the different things that have been going on. Not only the things in our own personal lives. But Daniel had it revealed from the Lord because he sought the Lord and he praised God. Then Daniel got to go reveal the dream, and it says that Nebuchadnezzar elevated these guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to heightened influence because he found that they were more wise and capable than everybody else. How crazy in his culture as a believer in a completely secular environment, not only doesn't get destroyed or rebels, but he is elevated throughout his life because he is wise, he goes before the Lord, he's making an impact in the midst of the chaos. What that tells me, because this isn't just for Daniel and the people in his time, this is for us as well. God's word is alive and active. It is possible for us as believers to respect and use wisdom and use care and be careful and not panic in the midst of chaos. And God will work within it, even when it doesn't seem like God's in control. I bet you anything, throughout his entire life, he's going, things are completely out of control, right? Like constantly. I can't imagine him not. But he decides and chooses to trust in the God of promises. Let's jump down to the next story. This is one of my favorite stories. This is in Daniel 3 now. And so the next chapter, I'm gonna story this one. I don't know if you guys grew up in church and heard this story of the golden statue, and I always loved this story and the fiery furnace, and I'm like, man, those guys are bosses, right? And so what happens is King Nebuchadnezzar yet again, builds a statue and says, everyone's gonna bow down to the statue, and he gathers all these nations because he was a ruler of nations. He conquered all these places. And so they play the music and they're supposed to bow down to this statue, right? And of course, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't. The king hears about it. He goes up to them and he says he's furious. He's not someone that you want to see furious. I don't know if you I don't like conflict. And so when you see the biggest king ever furious at you, I would be like, this is not good. I'd be afraid. I don't like it. I don't like when people are mad at me. But they stood their ground because he said, you know what? If you do not, I'll give you one more chance and I'm gonna throw you into the furnace. And this is his response, their response. Listen to the terminology that these guys use. Listen to this. Look at how they use their tone of voice that you can pick up in the writing. This is Daniel 3. It says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you have set up. "O Nebuchadnezzar, your majesty," said twice. You hear their tone? I'm like, how did these youth, after everything that they've done and even responding right throughout, not just say, forget it, and like start a revolt with their other Israelites? But they didn't do that. In fact, in here you see respect and even a care for Nebuchadnezzar. And if you journey with Daniel through this series, you'll even find moments where they were praying and caring for Nebuchadnezzar. And it got me thinking, there's a lot of people that we can look at and go, I can't believe them, and they're so wicked, and I can't believe they're doing this. And instead of having the heart that like cares and prays and not stand by and go, what's good for them is good for them and what's good for us. Not that. They stood their ground, but how did they do it? How has our hearts as believers been in the midst of this? And I love this because, not only was there Daniel's first line of defense God in this situation, now they're talking about offense. We don't have to defend ourselves because my God's gonna defend me. And then there was a little shed of doubt, and I'm like, oh man, they're actually human, thank you, right? They go, but even if he doesn't, I won't do it. But they said it with respect. And they knew that you can kill my body, but you cannot kill my soul. Amen? You can kill my body, but you can't kill my soul. Now, the thing that I've been thinking about, we all have our fears of like all the directions that things could go in the next couple of years when we look at our country, right? We don't have to get into details. But what if our worst fear about those things actually came true? Let's say that they came true. You as a believer, do you not still have confidence and a hope that even if that were to happen, we know the end game? That's basically what they were saying. They're saying, my God's gonna defend me, but even if he doesn't, I know the end game. You can kill me, but I'll be with God for an eternity. And for me, I have to check myself as I'm writing this sermon because I can freak out about a lot of stuff. And some of that, there's really hard things where our body reacts to certain scenarios and we can't control that and all those pieces. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying we won't have fear or make mistakes or do things wrongly or freak out about things at times. But I want to have the heart that they had as youth. These guys they said youth in the Daniel 1. We don't know how old they are now, but in this story, what has our hope been in? You guys know the rest of the story. He became furious. Says he heated up the furnace so hot that it killed the guards as they threw the others in. Like, dang. That's one of my worst fears of dying is by fire. So I'm like, dude, nightmare right there. But the story, they see God in the furnace with them. They come out and they are saved. And then he actually has people praise the Lord. Your God is the real God in that scenario. Crazy. The next story, let's jump up. This is Daniel in the lion's den. I forgot to write where down in Daniel, but I believe it's in the next few chapters. You can go find it. You know this story as well. And Daniel's in the lion's den. There's a new king now named Darius. So not only did he survive King Nebuchadnezzar and make all these right choices? If it were me, I'd be like, man, I really hope we get a better king. And he's like, nope, new one, not the greatest. But Darius, let's give you a little context. There's wise men that are now jealous of Daniel because he keeps being lifted up in influence, using wisdom, using respect, and in the craziness of the culture, in a foreign country under captivity, but yet he is being elevated. I do not understand. But these other wise men wanted to trap Daniel so that they could take his position. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't find fault with him. And I'm like looking at my life, I'm like, I'm pretty sure people could find several faults with my life, But they couldn't find any. That's the kind of life we want to have as believers. It even talks about that biblically, to strive hard so that others can't find fault. So they couldn't. The only thing they could do is target his God. I'm like, that's sweet. I would want to be known for that as well, like Daniel. And so they went to Darius and they were like, dude, I think we should make a decree that everyone should only pray to you. And I want to give you a little context on the wickedness of this king. What kind of king is okay with everyone only praying to him? Tells you a little bit about this king. Even though he respects Daniel, even though it shows that in the story, you still see how bad this guy is if he's willing to make the decree to have everyone pray to him. How stuck up do you gotta be to do that? But he does it. And I want you to notice in the story what Daniel does. He doesn't go, oh, it's over now, I'm done. This is unbiblical. He doesn't start a revolt. He doesn't have signs, let's start a militia, all these different things. He goes into his room. It says he leaves his door open because he's not going to hide himself praying. He's making it known that I'm going to pray to my God, but he does it respectfully. There's a way as believers to not compromise, but to be wise. And then it says that they took him and they had to put him in the lion's den. And when Darius found out about this, it says that he was deeply sorrowful or sad because he respected and loved Daniel. I just want to contrast the differences in these two though. Only pray to me. I'm willing to pray even if I get thrown in the lion's den. Talk about differing views, but yet Darius was sad when he got in trouble. How do people perceive us on the other side of different stances and things and how we present ourselves as believers? Would someone be like, oh man, so glad that guy's a jerk, you know? Or are there people who don't agree with us but go, man, I really love that guy. I respect that guy. In this time, under wisdom, under fire, we have to have wisdom. We should be presenting ourselves. We should look very different from the world. And I'm not gonna lie, there's times throughout this whole ordeal where my life doesn't look very different. Even though I'm talking from a different point of view, I'm still freaking out the same. Doesn't matter if you're freaking out on this side or this side, you're both freaking out, right? And I can do that as well. We should look different and use wisdom, and our first line of offense and defense is the Lord. And so as we look at these stories of Daniel, where have you been at throughout this last season? If you keep looking into the story, I hope you read through Daniel. Like I said earlier, he prays and cares for Nebuchadnezzar. That even got me thinking about what political people are we like, oh, I hate this guy. We want to make them look bad, or people who are different than us or farther entrenched in the world. And we go, I can't believe. Instead of like, man, I'm going to use wisdom. I'm not going to compromise. I'm going to speak the truth. I'm not going to not speak the truth, but I'm going to do it in love. What would our lives look like if we took steps in the direction to live like Daniel, having wisdom under fire? And so now I want to talk about wisdom for a little bit. I want to talk about wisdom, and we'll see this entrenched throughout the story. And so I love that we're one church in 3 locations. I love our Post Falls campus. I love our North campus. I'm friends with so many of them at the different campuses. And I love that our sermon team with all 3 campuses, we meet once a week. And we pray, Lord, what direction, what topic, what would you lead us in? And sometimes those conversations are fun. And sometimes they're like, okay, you got a bunch of, what do you call it? Too many bosses in the kitchen or whatever you call it, right? We're all like blah, 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 blah. Sometimes it's fun and it's really good. I love it. But I love when it comes to wisdom, what we kind of came up with, and a lot of this came from our senior pastor. Some of this was different input, but they kind of put a definition collectively. So wisdom is knowing what is true, to be right ethically and morally, right decisions in difficult situations, and most importantly, seeing from God's perspective to know what is true from his view. In this season, we have to know what God says about us, about others, about who he is. Right now, the enemy is trying to destroy the church. Here we're able to even meet, which is amazing, but so many other places, they're having a hard time even meeting, because here's why. Satan doesn't want us to be together. Satan doesn't want us to preach, to worship, to be in groups, to spur each other on, to point each other to redemption. He does not want that. If he can divide us, then he can conquer us. But here's what I know. It says that the gates of hell will not prevail against God's church. It will not. But we also have to make the choice to be in and connected and working in his church. And here's the deal. Right now, you guys, in the last 8 years of my ministry, man, I'm so old, right? I've seen right now, more than ever before, a desire for knowing God. A desire, people being broken, and even if they don't know it yet, they're searching and needing God. I cannot tell you how many of my old friends are coming out of the woodworks and people just broken all over the place. I think God is gonna do something. Doesn't mean it's gonna be easy. And when you look at the Bible, when things get rough, God shows up and people come to their knees and they return, and then we get off track again, and it goes over and over. But in this season, I think God is going to bring people to him. And as the church, we have to have wisdom in the middle of this fire. We have to know who God is. We have to have relationship with each other, and not just showing up in a building, or you can be surrounded by people and still not allow yourself to be known. We have to be known to an extent that when you see me going off, you come and grab me, and vice versa. Because in the middle of this fire, and as you even look into the stories of Daniel, and we'll talk more about this later in the following weeks, they were constantly meeting together. What do we do in this scenario? Praying. What should we do in this scenario? What should we do in this scenario? We need to unite. And we have the opportunity to be lights even when it's hard in this culture. I want to hit James 3 really quick because it also talks about wisdom. And we hit on it a little bit last week, so I'm just going to briefly touch on it again. James 3:17, it'll be on the screen. But the wisdom from above is first of all pure. It is also peace-loving, gentle at all times, and willing to yield to others. Willing to yield to others, blah. It is full of mercy and the fruit of good deeds. It shows no favoritism and is always sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of righteousness. I don't like to yield to others when I'm right. Or I think I'm right at least, right? Do you see Daniel doing this? Being a peacemaker, being gentle, being merciful. This dude is awesome. I want to meet him in heaven, right? What wisdom have you been having? As the ushers get ready to pass out communion, we're going to transition here in a minute. Worship team is going to come back up. I have about a couple more minutes, other things that I want to hit on as we get ready for that. I want to read Romans 12:1 because we're talking about not allowing the culture to corrupt us, to be determined to walk with wisdom under fire. And look what it says in Romans 12:1. Many of you have heard it. I love this verse. And it says in Romans 12:1, and so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because all that he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. Get this next part, verse 2. Do not copy the behaviors and the customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way that you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Guys, we come to God, we worship God because of all he has done for us. And it goes on to say that we're not to copy the customs and behaviors of this world, that we're not to freak out, that we're not to learn and do things like them, that we are to go to the Lord, that we're to use wisdom to care for others in the midst of the fire. In your life right now, if you were to look at yourself and go, where have I been? Am I hurting right now? Am I sad right now? Happy right now? I don't know what you are right now, but in a minute, we're going to get a time for you and the Lord to come together and just give it over to him this morning. And so I want to ask you a couple questions as they continue to pass that out. What are you hearing me say today? What's the one thing you want to remember? Are you secure in the Lord, and is your hope in him, or has it been in the world? Has it been in the culture? Do you need to refocus this morning? Have you been walking in wisdom? If you look back at the last year time, if you haven't, that's okay. Guess what? God is a God who forgives. God is a God who works in the broken situations and pieces and messes of our lives. And sometimes, even when we're trying to do the right thing, we still feel like a mess. But here's what I want to say to you today. If you're to walk into a mess, whether you're helping someone else or God working in your life, it often gets messier before it gets better. So if you feel like a mess, that's okay. Because that's often where God meets us. It says God is near the brokenhearted. So if you feel that way today, maybe that's where you need to be. And maybe God is closer to you than you think. My last question, and I've already said it 100 times, but that's okay. I seem to do that. Are you caught up in the culture? Do you need to step back for a minute and refocus your sight? And so in a minute, we're going to just spend some time with you and the Lord as we prepare for communion, as we prepare to remember what God has done, as we prepare to remember who he is, as we prepare to remember what these represent. But before we do that, I want to read one more verse, and then we're going to spend some of that time. This verse is found in Daniel 2. It has to do with the second story that I told. The story where Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and then he ordered all the wise men be killed, and then he went to the Lord, and the Lord provided the answer. Listen to his response in Daniel 2. He praised the Lord after that. Listen to this. It's amazing. Praise the name of God forever and ever, for he has all wisdom and power. He controls the course of world events. He removes kings and sets up other kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the scholars. He reveals deep and mysterious things and knows what lies hidden in the darkness, though he is surrounded by light. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors, for you have given me wisdom and strength. You have told me what we asked of you and revealed to us what the king demanded. He removes kingdoms and rulers. He controls the future events. How can that be when it seems so out of control? I'm sure Daniel asked that question, but he's in control. Let's spend some time, you and the Lord, just whatever you need to do, whatever challenge maybe, or whatever prayer, or maybe you just need to pray and spend some time with him. Let's do that now.